She shoves a pregnant woman into a hotel mirror in front of the entire lobby, believing her father's name will protect her, believing money and status will make this disappear. What she doesn't know is that the man sitting in the VIP lounge, the one who just watched everything unfold, is Dominic Valenti, the most feared name in New York's underground. And the woman she just attacked reminds him of someone he lost. A little sister who was bullied until she couldn't take it anymore. A girl he wasn't there to protect. Now, he's about to make sure history doesn't repeat itself. But here's the twist. The attacker's own father is a judge, a man of unshakable principle. Will he choose the law, or will he choose his own daughter? What follows is a war between privilege and justice, between a beast awakened by memory and a system forced to prove it still works. This is a story about how fast arrogance can crumble, how protection can come from unexpected shadows, and how one selfish act of cruelty will destroy everything the attacker thought she had. Trust me, the ending will hit harder than you expect. Tell us what time you are listening and where you are tuning in from. Drop a comment below. We would love to hear from you. A late October afternoon draped New York City in a glaze of golden light, thick and gleaming like honey, and nowhere received that light more completely than the grand lobby of the Meridian Grand Hotel. Set right in the heart of Manhattan, this five-star hotel had long since become a symbol of luxury and class, a place where only those who belonged to the upper crust could step through the revolving door of gleaming polished brass. The late-day sun poured through enormous floor-to-ceiling windows and spilled onto white marble veined with gray, casting shimmering bands of brightness as if someone had just scattered molten gold across the entire surface. Giant mirrors placed along the west wall of the VIP reception area reflected the whole magnificent scene, doubling the beauty of the space and making the great lobby seem to stretch on without end. Overhead, 3 massive crystal chandeliers imported from Vienna released a warm glow, thousands of tiny crystals glittering like an angel's tears dancing to every faint breath of air from the cooling system. Emerald velvet sofas were arranged in small clusters around glass-topped coffee tables, forming private corners for conversation for guests who wanted to find quiet in the flow of passing people. The hotel's signature fragrance, a refined blend of white jasmine and sandalwood, drifted gently through the air, present enough to be noticed, yet never so strong as to overwhelm. Classical music rose from speakers hidden somewhere within the walls, soft piano mingling with the tender sweep of violins, creating a soothing symphony that underlay every conversation. The delicate clink of champagne glasses touching came from the bar in the corner of the lobby, where a group of businessmen in custom-tailored suits were celebrating a deal that had just gone through. The tap of high heels from elegant ladies and refined women marked the stone with a steady rhythm, like the heartbeat of the hotel itself. Front desk staff in jet-black uniforms moved with the ease of shadows, professional smiles always waiting on their lips, ready to meet any request, even the smallest, from a guest. Leather-wrapped luggage carts glided silently over the red carpet that ran from the main entrance inward, not giving off a single sound. Everyone entering and leaving the lobby belonged to the kind of people the press liked to call the elite. Familiar faces from business magazines, movie stars trying to preserve discretion behind designer sunglasses, and polished couples walking hand in hand as if they had stepped straight out of a Hollywood film. Everything here breathed a perfection so complete it felt almost unreal, as though the Meridian Grand existed in a separate dimension, where the ugliness and violence of the outside world could not reach. Not one of the guests, slowly savoring an afternoon cocktail, and not one of the staff busy with their work, could have imagined that in only a few minutes this manufactured piece would be shattered to pieces. No one knew that tragedy was drawing near, taking soft, quiet steps across the shining marble, hiding beneath the face of an ordinary afternoon like any other. In the midst of that magnificent setting, the polished brass elevator doors on the east side of the lobby eased open in silence, and a young woman stepped out with slow, careful steps. Elena Carter, 27 years old, wore a soft blush pastel silk dress, fitted neatly across the bodice while the skirt flared gently to conceal the slight rise of her belly in the 4th month of pregnancy. Her long chestnut brown hair was left loose to fall naturally over her shoulders, rippling in mild waves like lazy ocean swells on a summer afternoon. Her face held a gentle beauty touched by sorrow, her large brown eyes carrying the weariness of someone who had lived through far too many sleepless nights. And yet within them, there was also the quiet resilience of a woman long accustomed to facing life's storms on her own. One hand rested protectively over her stomach, a gesture almost unconscious in an expectant mother, as if she were shielding the small life inside from everything cruel in the world outside. In her other hand she gripped a white envelope, Inside it, the papers that would officially mark the end of a marriage she once believed would last forever. Elena's life had never been easy, and perhaps it never would be. She lost both her father and mother at 8 years old, when a catastrophic car accident on the highway stole away the two people she loved most in a single night of storming rain. With no relatives able or willing to take in a child so young, Elena was sent to St. Mary's Orphanage on the outskirts of New York, where she spent the next 10 years of her life in cramped rooms with worn old bunk beds and meals that were never enough to fill her. She learned to fend for herself early, learned to swallow her tears as she watched other children leave with adoptive parents, learned to smile even when her heart was breaking. At 18, she left the orphanage with nothing more than a small suitcase holding a few sets of old clothes and a meager bit of savings from part-time jobs. She did every kind of work, from waiting tables to ringing up groceries, from housekeeping to office assistant, working and studying at once, earning her living while trying to build a better future. After nearly a decade of struggle, Elena finally secured a stable job at an interior design company, a small but cozy apartment, and a life that was not wealthy but was enough. Then Ryan Mitchell appeared, with his charming smile, his sweet promises, the look of a successful man you could trust. For the first time in her life, Elena allowed herself to believe in happiness, allowed herself to dream of the whole family she had never had. They married after a year of dating, and Elena thought that at last fate was smiling on her. But she was wrong. 2 months ago, when she discovered she was pregnant and was overflowing with joy as she wanted to share the news with her husband, Elena happened to see the messages on Ryan's phone. Passionate messages, thick with affection for another woman, unmistakable photographs, and promises of a future without her. Elena's world collapsed in that instant, but she did not cry, did not scream, did not smash anything. She simply packed her things in silence and moved out. Because now she was no longer living only for herself. She had a small life to protect. Today she had come here at Ryan's request to deliver the necessary papers for a formal separation. She did not want an argument, did not want a fight, did not want anything except peace. Her doctor had warned her to avoid all stress and conflict during this sensitive stage of pregnancy, and she intended to follow that advice. Just hand over the documents, say the few polite words required, and leave. Simple as that. Or at least, that was what Elena hoped as she took her first steps across the gleaming marble floor of the Meridian Grand's lobby, not knowing that fate had arranged for her an afternoon entirely different from the one she had planned. Not far from the main lobby, hidden in a shadowed corner screened off by deep blue velvet curtains and tall ornamental plants rising higher than a person's head, the VIP lounge of the Meridian Grand existed like a world set apart for only the most special guests. The light here was dialed down softer than in the main lobby, shaping an atmosphere that felt private and faintly mysterious, a place where important conversations could unfold without the attention of curious eyes. In the darkest corner of this area, where the late afternoon sun could not reach, a man sat in a black leather armchair, his posture relaxed, yet carrying the constant alertness of someone long accustomed to living on guard. Dominic Valenti, 36 years old, wore a perfectly tailored black suit that embraced his tall, powerful frame. A glossy black silk tie neatly knotted over a crisp white shirt, everything about him speaking of expense and refinement, down to the smallest detail. His face seemed carved from sharp, angular lines, a firm, square jaw, a high, straight nose, and thin lips that were often pressed into a flat, emotionless line. But what left the deepest impression were his gray eyes, cold as steel tempered by fire, deep as a bottomless chasm of water, eyes that could make the person facing him feel as though their soul were being seen straight through. His black hair was combed smoothly back, revealing a broad forehead and the veins at his temples that sometimes twitched faintly when he was turning something over in his mind. Seated across from Dominic was Marcus Chen, 38 years old, his most trusted right hand for more than a decade, an Asian man with an ordinary, forgettable appearance, yet possessed of a razor-sharp mind and absolute loyalty. Marcus was reporting on a shipment moving through the port of Newark, his voice low and measured, just enough for only the two of them to hear, the figures and locations laid out with precise detail. Dominic listened, occasionally nodding or asking a brief question, yet his gaze was not fully anchored to the conversation. By habit, driven deep into his blood by years in the underworld, he kept scanning, gray eyes sweeping across the VIP lounge and then out toward the main lobby beyond, registering every passing face, every unusual movement, every smallest detail. This was how Dominic Valenti had survived and risen to the peak of power over the past 15 years, through vigilance that never truly slept and an ability to read people with a single glance. In New York's underworld, the name Dominic Valenti was not merely known. It was spoken in whispers edged with fear. He was the most powerful boss in the city, the man who controlled much of the hidden machinery from Manhattan to Brooklyn, from disguised real estate dealings to networks of business that lived in the gray zones of the law. The police knew him, but they could not touch him because there was never enough evidence. Other criminals knew him too, and they either worked for him or stayed far from him, because standing against Dominic Valenti meant signing your own death sentence. He was not cruel for the sake of cruelty, but he never forgave betrayal or disrespect. His rules were clear and rigid, and anyone who broke them paid the price. And yet behind that cold, unfeeling exterior, behind eyes like steel and a face like stone, Dominic Valenti carried a wound that had never healed, a pain he never spoke of to anyone, a memory he tried to bury beneath mountains of work and power, but it remained there all the same, smoldering in his chest each night when he was alone with the dark. And it was at this very moment, when his gray gaze happened to drift across the main lobby and stopped on the sight of a young woman in a pastel dress, moving slowly with one hand resting over her belly, that something strange rose up inside Dominic, as if he were seeing the ghost of his past returning in the middle of the day. Sophia Valenti. The name rang through Dominic's mind like the lingering toll of a bell from a far-off church, pulling him back into memories he had tried to bury for 7 years and had never truly managed to keep underground. Sophia was his younger sister, 12 years behind him, an age gap so wide that when she was born, Dominic was already a teenager stepping into the most rebellious years of his life. Yet that distance never weakened the bond between them. If anything, it made the way Dominic loved her feel singular, as if she were a precious gift life had placed in his hands at the moment he needed it most. Sophia was a sensitive, gentle child, with gray eyes just like her brother's. Only in hers there was a clearness and innocence Dominic had long since lost. She had long, glossy black hair, a bright smile that could warm even the coldest winter days, and a heart too large for the cruel world she lived in. Sophia looked at her brother as a hero, an invincible god who could protect her from anything dark. Whenever Dominic came home, even if it was only for a few short days between distant trips, Sophia would run to him and throw her arms around him, telling him every story from school, showing off the drawings she made, the poems she wrote, and Dominic would listen to it all with a patience he never gave to anyone else in this world. But life kept pushing Dominic farther from home, farther from his sister, farther from those rare, peaceful moments. By the time Sophia reached her final year of high school, Dominic was across the ocean in a faraway European city, busy laying the groundwork for the underworld empire that would later make all of New York tremble. He called his sister every week, but the calls grew shorter, the stories thinner, and Dominic did not realize that Sophia's voice was slowly losing its old clarity. He did not know his sister was walking through hell inside the very school she entered each day. A group of girls, daughters of wealthy families accustomed to being indulged and never denied anything, had chosen Sophia as the target of their brutal bullying. They mocked her because her family was not upper class like theirs, because she was too sensitive, too quick to cry, too different. They spread vicious rumors, cut her off from her friends, and turned every day of school into torture. Sophia never told Dominic because she did not want him to worry, because she believed she could handle it herself, because she did not want to trouble the hero she adored. That deadly mistake became Dominic's regret for the rest of his life. Then the fateful night arrived, an end-of-year party at the home of one of the bullies, where Sophia was lured with empty promises of making peace and starting over. But it was a trap. In front of dozens of people, the group humiliated Sophia in the cruelest way they could, reading aloud private diary entries they had stolen from her locker, mocking the feelings she held for a boy who had never even known, calling her names no one deserves to hear. And worse than that, they recorded everything and posted it on social media for the whole world to see. Not a single person there stepped forward to protect Sophia, not one. They only stood and laughed, or stayed silent, or turned away as if what was happening had nothing to do with them. That night Sophia sent Dominic a message, the last message she ever sent, only a few trembling lines on a phone screen. "I am sorry. I am not strong enough. You are my hero, but I can't wait for you to come save me anymore. I love you, Dominic." Dominic received that message 8 hours later, when he had just finished an all-night meeting and opened his phone to check it. He called back immediately, but no one answered. He called home, and the strangled sound of his mother's sobs told him everything. Sophia was gone, quietly and alone, in the pink bedroom she had loved, with a photograph of her and Dominic laid on her chest. He did not make it back in time to say goodbye. He was not there when his sister needed him most. He, Sophia's hero, had failed her in a way that could never be forgiven. From that day on, Dominic Valenti became a completely different man. He returned to New York, built his empire with terrifying ruthlessness and efficiency, but inside him that wound never healed. He swore to himself, at Sophia's grave, that he would never allow something like that to happen to anyone else. He would never stand by while the weak were bullied and do nothing. He would never turn his face away the way people had turned away from his sister. And now, as his gray eyes followed the pregnant woman walking alone through the hotel lobby, carrying a loneliness and fragility so painful it could break the heart, Dominic felt that oath echoing in his chest more powerfully than ever before. While Dominic was still drowning in the painful memories of Sophia, his gray gaze was suddenly caught by a different movement on the far side of the lobby, where a woman in a blazing red gown had just stepped out through the main revolving door, with the bearing of a queen entering her own domain. Victoria Harrington, 29 years old, was the perfect embodiment of luxury and arrogance, forged by a life that had never known deprivation or failure. The red dress clung to her body like a second skin, accentuating every curve both alluring and lethal. A custom design by a famous fashion house in Milan at a price that could buy a luxury car. Her golden blonde hair fell in flawless waves over her bare shoulders, each strand set in place as if she had just stepped out of a fashion magazine shoot. The jewelry on her glittered under the chandeliers, the diamond necklace, the emerald earrings, the Cartier watch on her wrist, all of it the kind of treasure most women could only dream of. But the most striking thing was not the extravagance of Victoria's appearance, it was the way she walked, every step steady and overflowing with confidence. Chin lifted high, green eyes staring straight ahead as if she owned not only this lobby but the world beyond those glass doors as well. It was the walk of someone used to having everything placed into her hands, used to every door opening in front of her, used to never hearing the word no from anyone. Clinging tightly to Victoria's side was a man in a charcoal gray suit, Ryan Mitchell, 34 years old, the chief financial officer of a major investment corporation in Manhattan, and also the legal husband of Elena Carter. Ryan had a classically American kind of good looks, with brown hair neatly combed to one side, a sharply cut face, and a charming smile that had once made Elena believe she had found the prince of her dreams. But if you looked closer, you would see something wrong in Ryan's eyes, a constant evasiveness, an unease hidden beneath the surface of confidence, the gaze of a man doing something he knows is wrong, yet does not have the courage to admit it or stop. Victoria held on to Ryan's arm with undisguised possession, her fingers tipped with nails painted blood red wrapping around his arm as if she were marking her territory in front of the entire hotel. They moved toward the area near the wall of giant mirrors, where Victoria chose a spot that allowed her to see and be seen from every angle of the lobby, because to her, every entrance had to be a performance. Ryan stood beside her, but his eyes kept sliding down to the watch on his wrist, a gesture of worry and impatience that Victoria either did not notice or chose to ignore. She talked about the coming weekend plans, about the trip to the Hamptons she had booked, about dinner at her favorite French restaurant, her voice sharp and excited as if life were nothing but an endless chain of pleasures. Then she lowered her voice, tipping her head toward Ryan's shoulder with a calculated intimacy, whispering loudly enough for him to hear yet softly enough to create the illusion of privacy. "Soon you will be completely free," Victoria said with a satisfied smile. "She will sign the papers, you will be rid of that burden, and we can start our own life without sneaking around anymore." Ryan did not answer, did not nod in agreement, did not shake his head in protest. He simply stood there in silence, his eyes still evasive, his face unreadable, like a man who has imprisoned himself in a situation with no way out and has resigned himself to fate. The air between them was strangely tense, not the tension of love or passion, but the tension of two people playing a game they both know can't end well. And in that very moment, as Victoria savored the nearness of victory, she saw a familiar figure approaching them from the direction of the elevators, a woman in a gentle pastel dress, one hand resting over her belly and the other holding a white envelope. Victoria's green eyes darkened at once, and on her lips, a cruel smile slowly bloomed. Elena recognized Ryan and Victoria the moment she had taken only a few steps across the gleaming marble floor, and her heart sank as if someone had laid a heavy stone on her chest. She had known Victoria would be here. Ryan had not bothered to hide it when they exchanged messages to arrange this meeting, but knowing something in advance and actually facing it were two entirely different things. She drew a deep breath, telling herself this was only a simple exchange of paperwork, that she would not let anyone or anything disturb the peace she was trying to protect for the child growing inside her. With the white envelope clenched tight in her hand, Elena kept walking toward the two of them standing near the mirrored wall, her steps still measured and composed even as she fought 1,000 tangled emotions inside. Victoria saw Elena coming, and her first reaction was not annoyance or irritation the way someone might expect, but a strange flare of light in her green eyes, the gleam of cruel enjoyment, of a predator who has just watched its prey wander willingly into the trap. The smile on Victoria's lips widened and widened, but it was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a cat toying with a mouse before the pounce. Elena stopped about a meter away, close enough to speak yet far enough to keep a safe distance, and she tried to aim her gaze toward Ryan, trying to ignore Victoria's overwhelming presence. "I only need to hand over the papers," Elena said, her voice calm and gentle, without a single extra emotion. "It will not take long, Ryan. You look them over and sign where you need to, and I will leave right away." She held the envelope out, hoping Ryan would take it and end everything as quickly as she wanted. But before Ryan could make any move at all, Victoria stepped forward and planted herself between them like an unbreakable wall. "Oh, you actually came," Victoria said, her sharp voice ringing out loudly enough for the people nearby to hear. "I thought you would be ashamed and stay home. Coming to a public place like this, in that condition, do you not feel embarrassed?" Elena felt her cheeks burn, but she swallowed the rising humiliation and kept her voice even. "I am here at Ryan's request to deliver the papers. That is all." Victoria burst into laughter, a sound as sharp as shattering glass, full of contempt and malice. "Papers? You think you still have anything to negotiate? Look at you." Victoria flicked her hand toward Elena in disgust. Pathetic. Completely pathetic. A cheap dress, a tired face, no makeup, no jewelry. You look like a housekeeper who wandered into a 5-star hotel. No wonder he found someone else. Really, you can't blame him. The words struck Elena like knives driven straight into her heart, but she would not allow herself to collapse. Not here. Not in front of this woman. She placed her hand over her belly, searching for strength in the small life growing inside her, and kept her eyes fixed forward. A few guests nearby had begun to notice the conversation as it sharpened, heads turning, curious looks gathering on the three of them, whispers starting to spread like small waves. Victoria realized she had an audience, and that only thrilled her more, as if the larger the stage, the grander the performance had to be. She took another step toward Elena, green eyes glittering with danger. "And that pregnancy?" Victoria lowered her voice but still kept it loud enough for the people around them to hear. "Do you think it will keep him? How pitiful. The baby will not keep him either, sweetheart. He has already chosen, and he did not choose you." Elena felt her whole body tremble, not from fear but from the fury igniting in her chest. Yet she knew she could not let emotion overwhelm reason, not when she was carrying a small life that needed protection. "I did not come here to argue," Elena said, her voice holding an astonishing steadiness even as something inside her broke apart. "Please let me speak with Ryan. This is between my husband and me." She turned to look at Ryan, the man she had once loved with her whole heart, the man she once believed would protect her from everything cruel in the world. But Ryan only stood there, silent as a statue, his eyes sliding away, unable to meet hers, his face frozen without the smallest trace of feeling. He did not speak up to defend her, did not tell Victoria to stop, did nothing at all to halt this public humiliation. He simply stood there, cowardly and useless, as if Elena were a stranger he had never known. And that silence, more than any of Victoria's vicious words, shattered Elena's heart into 1,000 pieces. Victoria could feel the attention of the crowd gathering around them, the eyes fixed in their direction, the whispers spreading outward, and instead of feeling ashamed or wanting to stop, she grew even more excited, like an actress on a stage who has just realized the audience is watching her every gesture. Victoria's voice grew louder, sharper, more venomous, echoing through the grand lobby of the Meridian Grand like a whip cracking through the air. "Who do you think you are?" Victoria screamed, her green eyes blazing with the fire of contempt and hatred. "An orphan no one even wanted to adopt, raised in an orphanage like a cast-off, with no father, no mother, no relatives, no one in this world who cares whether you even exist. And now you dare stand here, in front of me, trying to cling to a man who has been sick of you for a long time already. Do you even know what shame is?" Those poisonous words pierced straight through the calm shell Elena had tried so hard to build, touching the deepest wounds in her soul, wounds she thought had healed long ago but were still, in truth, bleeding. Elena's whole body trembled, not from cold but from pain erupting from somewhere deep inside, from the humiliation of having her most painful past laid bare before dozens of strangers' eyes. Yet in the middle of that storm, something inside Elena suddenly hardened, a strength she did not know she possessed. Perhaps the instinct of a mother protecting her child, perhaps the last pride of someone who had endured too much and refused to be crushed one more time. She lifted her chin, looked straight into Victoria's malicious eyes, and in a voice that shook yet held steady, she answered, "What you say does not change the truth. I am Ryan's legal wife. And no matter how many words you use to humiliate me, it does not make you a better person or make me any less than you." That sentence, brief yet heavy with weight, made Victoria freeze as if she had been struck across the face by lightning. In the whole of her 29 years, Victoria Harrington had never been answered like that. Never had anyone dared to look her in the eye and speak words that refused to bow. She had been raised in absolute indulgence by her father, a powerful judge, and by her mother, a society woman, in a world where every desire was granted, every mistake covered, and every person who stood in her way swept aside. Victoria did not know how to accept refusal, did not know how to face someone standing as an equal and looking at her without fear. And the fact that the one who dared do it was Elena, a woman Victoria considered no more than an ant beneath her heel, made the rage inside her flare so violently it could not be contained. Around them, more guests had lifted their phones, screens glittering like electronic eyes recording every turn of events. Some were filming, some were taking photographs, and all of them were witnessing Victoria Harrington, the daughter of the respected Judge Robert Harrington, losing control in the lobby of a 5-star hotel. Victoria noticed those phones, and instead of feeling the need to stop, she felt publicly humiliated, as if Elena had just forced her into a shameful position in front of everyone. In Victoria's mind, reason had been replaced by blind fury. She no longer saw Elena as a vulnerable pregnant woman. She saw only an enemy, the one who had dared to humiliate her before a crowd. Elena, sensing the situation growing more tense and dangerous, decided to end this meaningless exchange. She stepped to the side, trying to move around Victoria to reach Ryan and hand him the white envelope, hoping that at the very least she could complete her original purpose and leave this place as quickly as possible. But that act of turning away, whether accidental or deliberate, became the last drop that made the cup overflow. Victoria saw Elena turning her back, walking as if she did not exist, as if Victoria Harrington were nothing but a small obstacle that could be brushed aside, and whatever restraint remained in her dissolved completely. "Do not turn your back on me," Victoria screamed, her voice breaking in a frenzy of uncontrolled rage, rolling through the hotel lobby like thunder in a clear sky. Her eyes widened, her beautiful face twisting with anger, and in that moment Victoria Harrington was no longer a refined young lady of privilege. She became a wild animal that had lost all control. It happened in an instant, so fast no one had time to react. Victoria lunged at Elena with the speed of an arrow just released from a bow, her hands with long fingers and nails painted blood red thrusting forward, and before Elena could even turn to see what was happening, she felt 2 palms slam hard into her back with an irresistible force. The shove was viciously strong, not a light push from a momentary loss of control, but a deliberate act of violence driven by the full weight of the hatred that had been building inside Victoria since the moment she saw Elena step out of the elevator. Elena was completely unprepared, her body pitching forward, her feet in low-heeled shoes skidding on the glossy marble, and in the horrifying second when she realized she was falling, the instinct of a mother rose above everything else and seized her hands. The white envelope slipped from her grasp, floated in the air, then dropped to the floor, and both of Elena's hands flew to her belly at once, shielding the small life inside from the impact that was coming, even though it meant she had nothing left to break her fall. Elena's back and shoulders struck the massive mirrored wall with a dull, heavy sound. Not the sharp crash of glass shattering, but the thud of human bone and flesh meeting something hard and cold, a sound that rolled through the lobby like a funeral drum marking the moment tragedy arrived. The huge mirror shuddered violently from the force, invisible ripples spreading across its reflective surface, but miraculously it did not break, as if even the glass were holding its breath to see what would happen next. Then Elena slid down, her back against the mirror, her body slowly crumpling onto the icy marble floor, and she sat there with both arms still wrapped tight around her belly, eyes wide with utter terror. The entire lobby of the Meridian Grand froze in a moment of silence so tight it felt impossible to breathe. Classical music still drifted from somewhere in the sound system, but no one could hear it anymore. The conversations, the clink of champagne, the footsteps on stone, all of it vanished, replaced by a dreadful stillness, as if the world itself had stopped turning. Dozens of eyes locked onto Elena, sitting on the floor, the sight of her small and fragile in her rumpled pastel dress, her long hair fallen loose, her trembling hands clasped over her pregnant belly, creating a scene so heartbreaking that many people had to turn away because they could not bear it. Then sharp inhales began to sound, from one person, then two, then spreading through the crowd, the raw noise of shock and horror, as everyone began to understand what terrible thing had just happened in front of them. "My baby," Elena whispered, her voice shaking and broken, so weak it was nearly impossible to hear. "Please, my baby." Her brown eyes brimmed with tears as she looked down at her belly, with the unbearable fear of a mother praying her child would be safe. She did not care about the pain blooming across her back and shoulder, did not care about the humiliation she had just endured, did not care about the dozens of eyes on her. She cared only about the small life inside her, the child she had sworn to protect at any cost, the child that was all she had left in this world. A hotel security guard was the first to break the crowd's paralysis, rushing to Elena as fast as he could, his face tight with alarm. "Ma'am, please do not move. Stay just as you are. We will call an ambulance right away." Guests began to gather closer, some still holding up phones to film, others pushing in to see more clearly, and a small few who were truly worried trying to help. An older woman in an elegant Chanel outfit removed the silk scarf from her neck and gently placed it under Elena's head, murmuring words of comfort. And Victoria stood there like a statue in the middle of the lobby, her hands still lifted in the air, and for the first time in her life, that arrogant face showed a flicker of panic as she realized what she had just done. For a brief second, Victoria Harrington saw the consequences clearly, saw Elena there with tear-filled eyes and arms around her belly, and something like fear swept through her heart. But that moment passed quickly, replaced by the self-protecting instinct, rooted deep in the blood of someone used to being shielded from consequences. Victoria drew a deep breath, lifted her chin, and in a sharp, defiant voice loud enough for everyone to hear, she declared, "She fell by herself. I did not do anything. She bumped into me and slipped. You all saw it." But when her eyes swept the crowd, Victoria did not find the agreement she expected. Instead, she saw only disgust, outrage, and dozens of phones recording every second of the tragedy she herself had caused. From the shadowed corner of the VIP lounge, Dominic Valenti had watched the entire spectacle unfold before him, like an audience member sitting through a tragedy inching, scene by scene, toward an ending both heartbreaking and inevitable. He had seen the woman in the pastel dress step out of the elevator with a look of loneliness and fragility. He had seen her walk toward the man standing beside the woman in red, and he had heard the insults echo across the lobby even though he was some distance away. He had seen how the pregnant woman tried to keep her composure, tried to de-escalate the situation, tried to protect her dignity with replies that were gentle yet heavy with meaning. And he had seen the moment the woman in red lost control, lunging forward with hands raised, driving a hard shove into the back of someone who could not defend herself. The instant Elena hit the mirrored wall and slid to the floor, something strange happened inside Dominic's mind. The scene in front of him suddenly blurred, as if someone had laid a transparent film over the present moment, and he no longer saw the lobby of the Meridian Grand. Instead, he saw a large living room in a Long Island mansion 7 years earlier, where Sophia, his little sister, stood trapped in a ring of bullies, gray eyes just like his swimming with tears and terror. He saw Elena clutching her belly with trembling hands, and that image layered itself over Sophia clutching her chest as if trying to keep her heart from shattering. He saw Elena alone among a crowd of strangers with no one stepping forward to protect her, and that image laid itself over Sophia alone at the fateful party, surrounded by cruel faces while everyone else only watched. The two visions merged into one, past and present interlaced, and the pain Dominic believed he had buried deep beneath the cold ice in his heart suddenly flared back to life with a force he could not contain. But this was not the hot, careless anger of people who can't control themselves, not a brief eruption that would cool and fade. This was anger cold as ice, deep as an abyss, patient as a hunting beast waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This was the anger of Dominic Valenti, a man who had built an empire out of perfectly controlled ruthlessness, a man whose fury was never rushed, yet always reached its target. Marcus Chen, seated across from him, was the first to notice the change. After more than a decade at Dominic's side, Marcus had learned to read his boss through the smallest signals, and what he saw now made him hold his breath. Dominic's gray eyes, already cold, had turned dark as a sky before a massive storm. His jaw tightened, blue veins rising beneath his skin, and the hand holding a glass of whiskey suddenly stopped in midair, frighteningly still. "What are you going to do?" Marcus asked, his voice low and careful. Even though he knew the answer before Dominic opened his mouth, Dominic did not reply at once. He set the whiskey down on the table with a movement so gentle and exact that not a single drop spilled. Then he rose, slowly, unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. He fastened the button of his black suit jacket with steady fingers that did not tremble, smoothed away wrinkles that were not there on the perfectly tailored fabric, and adjusted his black silk tie with the meticulous care of a man preparing for an important meeting, not a confrontation. This time Dominic finally spoke, his voice deep and even, with not a hint of emotion on the surface, though Marcus could hear the storm roaring beneath every syllable. "I will not sit and watch." And then Dominic Valenti stepped out of the VIP lounge, passing through the deep blue velvet curtains and moving toward the main lobby, where Elena was still on the floor with her arms wrapped around her belly and tears in her eyes. Each step of his shoes sounded on the marble with a steady, decisive beat, like war drums announcing a battle about to begin. The crowd in the lobby, still buzzing over what had just happened, fell abruptly quiet as they became aware of the man approaching. No one knew who he was, but something primal in each of them was screaming that this was a dangerous predator, and they moved aside automatically to make a path for him. Dominic did not look at them, his gray eyes fixed on only one point, the pregnant woman leaning against the mirrored wall, alone and terrified, just like Sophia in his most painful memory. But this time would be different. This time, he would not arrive too late. Dominic moved toward the crowd gathered around Elena with steady steps and not a trace of haste, as if he were strolling through a park on an ordinary afternoon, rather than walking into the center of an incident that had thrown the entire hotel lobby into chaos. Yet something strange happened as he drew near. The people packed around Elena suddenly felt an inexplicable pull, some primitive instinct deep in the unconscious, screaming that they needed to make room, needed to step away from the man approaching. No one knew who he was. No one recognized the face or the name Dominic Valenti, but everyone could feel what radiated from him, danger held in perfect control, a quiet power that could not be denied. One by one they shifted aside, opening a clear path straight to where Elena sat, slumped against the mirrored wall, and Dominic passed through without needing to speak a word or make a single gesture. When he reached Elena, Dominic did something that stunned everyone watching. He dropped to one knee touching the icy marble, despite the expensive suit that could be dirtied, despite the image of a powerful kingpin bending down before a strange woman. And when he spoke, his voice made Elena lift her head, because it was nothing like what she would have expected from a man who looked so cold. "Are you hurting anywhere?" Dominic asked, his tone unexpectedly gentle and warm, as if he were speaking to an injured child rather than a grown stranger he had never met. "Do not move. Stay just as you are. Tell me how you feel." Elena looked up, her tear-soaked brown eyes meeting the gray eyes of the man kneeling in front of her, and in that moment she felt something strange. Those eyes were cold, cold as steel tempered by fire, deep as the ocean at night, but they were not frightening. There was something hidden far beneath that gaze, a pain carefully concealed, a true compassion Elena could sense, even though she did not understand where it came from. "My baby," Elena whispered, her voice trembling. "I am worried about my baby." "I know," Dominic answered, the gentleness still there. "The doctor will be here any moment. You only need to stay calm and do not move." He slipped a hand into his suit pocket, drew out his phone, and dialed with steady fingers. When the call connected, he spoke in a brief, decisive voice. "Evelyn, come to Meridian Grand right now. Main lobby. A pregnant woman is injured. I need you here in 15 minutes. Without waiting for a reply, Dominic ended the call and slid the phone back into his pocket. He looked at Elena again, his eyes carrying a silent promise that she would be protected, and then he rose and slowly turned toward Victoria, who stood a few steps away with arrogance still clinging to her face, though a hint of panic now flickered in her eyes. "What did you just do?" Dominic asked, and his voice had changed completely. The warmth he had given Elena was gone, replaced by a chill that reached the bone, each word dropping like a shard of ice onto the marble floor. Victoria, who was used to people lowering their heads before her, who had never been looked at with eyes like that, felt a shiver run up her spine. But the instinct for self-defense forged through 29 years under her father's protection made her recover quickly, lifting her chin and firing back in a defiant voice. "Who are you to question me? Do you know who I am? My father is Judge Robert Harrington, one of the most powerful judges in this city. You should be careful what you say and do, because you do not want to find out what happens when you go up against the Harrington family." Victoria expected the man in front of her to back down the moment he heard her father's name, the way everyone else had backed down for her entire life. But instead she saw a smile slowly spread across his mouth, and that smile made the blood in her veins turn to ice. It was not a friendly smile, not a fearful smile. It was the smile of a wolf who has just heard a sheep announce it has claws. "I do not care who your father is," Dominic said, his voice still ice-cold, but now threaded with something even more dangerous, a threat wrapped beneath every syllable. "I do not care whether you are the judge's daughter or the president's daughter. The only thing I care about right now is that you just attacked a pregnant woman in front of dozens of witnesses and dozens of cameras. And that, Miss Harrington, is not something any name or power can cover up." The sound of fast, urgent footsteps rang out from the direction of the front desk as the Meridian Grand's security team finally arrived after the first chaotic seconds. The head of security, a middle-aged man with a powerful build and a stern face, assessed the situation in a heartbeat and began directing his staff to control the crowd pressing in around them. "Please keep your distance," he said in a commanding voice. "We have called an ambulance and the police. Please cooperate so we can handle this situation." Victoria, seeing security appear, immediately seized it as a chance to flip the story. She moved toward the head of security with the posture of a wronged victim, her voice high and filled with manufactured outrage. "She slipped on her own," Victoria declared, pointing toward Elena on the floor. "It was not my fault. She was unsteady and fell by herself. I did not even touch her. This is slander. My father is Judge Harrington, and I will sue all of you for defamation if you dare blame me." The head of security looked at Victoria with an expression that did not move at all. Then he slowly lifted his gaze to the ceiling where a security camera was quietly recording everything, its red light blinking steadily like the heartbeat of a witness that can't lie. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "everything has been recorded. This entire lobby has 24/7 surveillance. We will let the police review the evidence and reach their conclusion." Victoria's face went pale for a split second before she could hide it, but she quickly restored her familiar arrogance, though anyone paying close attention could see panic beginning to kindle in her green eyes. At that moment, Marcus Chen appeared beside Dominic as silently as a shadow, leaning in to speak into his boss's ear in a level, emotionless voice. "I have video from 4 different angles," Marcus reported. "The hotel cameras, and at least 12 guests recorded it on personal phones. Some have already started posting it on social media." Dominic gave a slight nod, his gray eyes never leaving Victoria. "Make sure nothing gets deleted," he said in a low voice. "Contact hotel management and tell them to preserve every recording, and collect contact information for everyone who filmed it. I want copies of everything." Marcus nodded and withdrew without a sound, moving to carry out the order with the efficiency of a man who had long since learned to complete every task without asking another question. Police sirens wailed outside, growing closer, and only minutes later 2 uniformed officers stepped into the hotel lobby with serious faces. The head of security led them quickly to the scene, and they began taking statements from witnesses. And it was then that Ryan Mitchell, the man who had stood motionless like a statue from the very beginning, finally opened his mouth. "Officers," Ryan said, his voice slightly shaky though he tried to sound confident, "I think there is a misunderstanding here. Victoria did not mean to. He did not even finish the sentence before Dominic turned, and those cold gray eyes settled on Ryan with the weight of an entire iceberg. "You," Dominic cut in, his voice so steeped in contempt that Ryan took an involuntary step back, stood there, and watched your wife be publicly humiliated. You stood there and watched her be attacked. You did nothing to protect her. You did not say a single word to stop it. And now you want to speak up to defend the person who shoved your wife to the floor. You have no right to say anything here. You do not even deserve to stand here." Ryan opened his mouth as if to argue, but no sound came out. He stood there, his face burning red with shame, and for the first time in his life he felt real contempt from a complete stranger, contempt that somehow made him feel small and worthless. The siren of an ambulance sounded, and not long after a medical team appeared with a stretcher. They moved quickly to Elena, assessed her condition, and carefully lifted her onto the stretcher. Dominic stepped to Elena's side before she was taken away, looking down at the fragile woman whose eyes were still filled with fear for the child inside her. "My doctor will go with you," Dominic said, his voice returning to the gentleness he seemed to reserve only for her. "You will receive the best care. You will be safe, I promise." Elena looked up at the stranger who had appeared like a guardian angel in the storm of her life, and though she did not understand why, she believed that promise. The Midtown Manhattan precinct that evening witnessed a rare scene when Victoria Harrington was brought in to give her statement, not in handcuffs, yet not treated like an honored guest the way she expected, either. Sitting in an interview room with dull gray walls and a cold metal table, Victoria had completely lost the glamorous, seductive aura she always wore in public. Her golden blonde hair now hung loose and messy. Her flawless makeup had smeared under beads of anxious sweat, and her expensive red gown looked painfully out of place in the bleak atmosphere of the station. "I want to call my father," Victoria shouted for what felt like the 100th time, her voice gone rough from screaming too much. "You have no right to keep me here. I need a lawyer. My father is Judge Robert Harrington. Do you hear me, Judge Harrington? You will regret treating me like this." The officer taking her statement, a middle-aged man with the tired face of someone who had seen too much in his life, hesitated for a moment when he heard the name Harrington. In New York, policing and the justice system, Robert Harrington was a name respected to the point of near legend, a judge famous for integrity that could not be shaken and rulings that were fair and did not bend for anyone. The officer glanced at his colleague with a look full of meaning, and both of them understood that this case was far more complicated than they had thought. But procedure still had to be followed, and they continued recording the statement while Victoria kept demanding and threatening. Not far away, in a luxurious penthouse overlooking the whole sweep of Manhattan at night, Dominic Valenti sat in his favorite leather armchair, listening as Marcus Chen reported the information he had gathered in only a few short hours. Victoria Harrington, 29 years old, the only daughter of Judge Robert Harrington and Patricia Harrington, Marcus read from the tablet in his hand in a steady voice. Raised in an upper-class family, attended private schools, graduated college with a communications degree, but has never truly worked a single day in her life. Lives on her father's money and spends as if money grows on trees. "And her father?" Dominic asked. Gray eyes turned toward the window where the city lights glittered like a carpet of stars. "Robert Harrington has been considered the most incorruptible judge in New York throughout 30 years of his career," Marcus continued. "Never any scandal, never accused of taking bribes or showing favoritism in any case. Known for ruling fairly even when facing the most powerful people. Many call him the conscience of this city's justice system." A long silence stretched out before Marcus went on, his voice turning slightly more hesitant. "But Victoria is the complete opposite. She has caused trouble many times in the past, from fights at nightclubs to striking a server at a luxury restaurant. Everything was quietly smoothed over, sometimes with settlement money, sometimes with calls from the family law office. None of it ever reached court. None of it ever appeared in the press." Dominic nodded slowly. The information did not surprise him. He had met too many people like Victoria in his life. Rich children protected so completely they never had to face consequences. People who believed money and power could buy everything, even immunity from the law. But this time would be different. "This time it will not be quiet," Dominic murmured, his voice cold as ice in winter. He turned to Marcus with a decisive look. "The video you collected from the hotel and from the people who filmed on their phones, leak it onto social media from anonymous accounts. Make sure it appears on every platform, from Twitter to Instagram to TikTok. I want this entire city to see what Victoria Harrington did to an innocent pregnant woman." Marcus nodded without hesitation, and within an hour the video of what happened at the Meridian Grand began surfacing everywhere on the internet. It spread at a dizzying speed, climbing from a few hundred views to thousands, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. Hashtags appeared and began trending, the public furious at the sight of a woman in a red gown shoving a pregnant woman into a mirrored wall. And that fury burned even hotter when the attacker's identity was revealed. "The judge's daughter attacks a pregnant woman." Headlines began appearing across news sites. "Victoria Harrington, the Harrington heiress, shows her true face. Will a judge's daughter receive special privilege before the law?" And in the middle of the media storm crashing down, Victoria Harrington still sat inside the police station, completely unaware that the world outside was witnessing every one of her sins, and that this time, no amount of money or connections could save her from the judgment of the public. Judge Robert Harrington's office sat on the top floor of the Manhattan courthouse, a vast room lined with shelves crammed full of law books and case precedent, classical paintings on the walls, and an oak desk that had followed him through 30 years of his career. Robert Harrington, 62 years old, sat behind that desk with the stern, dignified bearing he had maintained all his life, his white silver hair combed back, deep blue eyes hidden behind gold-rimmed glasses, and the weathered face of a man who had spent his life fighting for justice. He was reviewing the file of a complicated case when the office door opened, and his assistant, a middle-aged woman who had worked with him for more than 20 years, stepped in with a level of tension on her face that was unusual. "Sir," she said in a trembling voice, "there is an emergency. It concerns Victoria." Robert Harrington looked up, unease beginning to spread through his chest as he saw the worry on the face of the woman he trusted. The assistant set a tablet on the desk in front of him, the screen showing a video going viral on social media with millions of views. And when Robert Harrington pressed play, his world collapsed right in front of his eyes. He saw his daughter in the familiar red gown, saw her insulting a pregnant woman in the lobby of a luxury hotel, saw her lunge forward and shove the victim into a mirrored wall. Every second of the video was a knife driven into his heart. And when it ended, Robert Harrington's face had gone white as paper, his hands trembling on the desktop. "The police have filed the report," the assistant added in a low voice. Victoria was released on bail through the family attorney, but the incident is drawing enormous attention from the media and the public. Robert Harrington said nothing, only nodded to signal the assistant to leave, and when the door closed, he sat in silence for a long time, trying to process what he had just witnessed. 2 hours later, Victoria Harrington walked into her father's office with eyes swollen from crying, makeup completely smeared, and her usual arrogance gone without a trace, replaced by the panic and desperation of a child pleading for an adult to save her. "Dad," Victoria rushed toward the desk, her voice choking with tears. "You have to help me. She provoked me first. She humiliated me on purpose in front of everyone. I had no choice. You have to do something. You have power. You have connections. You can make this disappear like the other times." Robert Harrington looked at his daughter, the only child he loved more than his own life, the child he had sheltered and protected for 29 years, and for the first time in his life he realized how terribly wrong he had been in the way he raised her. "I watched the video," he said, his voice so cold and even it made Victoria shiver. She was trying to leave. She turned her back and she was about to walk away. "You shoved her from behind. A pregnant woman. In front of dozens of witnesses and cameras. But you are a judge," Victoria screamed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You are one of the most powerful men in this city. You can do something. You have to do something. I am your daughter." Robert Harrington stood, slowly turned his back on his daughter, and walked to the large window overlooking all of Manhattan, where millions of people lived and worked under the protection of the legal system he had devoted his life to preserving. A long silence followed, heavy and suffocating, broken only by Victoria's ragged breathing in the room. And then at last Robert Harrington spoke, his voice low and pained as if every word were tearing his heart apart. "Because I am a judge," he said without turning to look at her. "I can't do anything for you. I have spent my life protecting justice, ensuring the law applies fairly to everyone no matter who they are. I can't betray everything I believe in because my daughter committed a crime." Victoria stood there, stunned as if lightning had struck her in a clear sky, unable to believe what she had just heard. For all 29 years of her life, she had believed her father would protect her from anything, that nothing could touch her as long as she had a powerful father. And now that very father was refusing to help her, turning away from her when she needed him most. Victoria's knees buckled, and she collapsed onto the office floor like a puppet with its strings cut, her desperate sobs ripping apart the silence of the room. While Victoria was facing her father's refusal, Elena lay in a private hospital room at Mount Sinai, one of the best hospitals in New York, where Dominic had arranged for her to be transferred the moment the ambulance left the Meridian Grand. The room was spacious and quiet, its walls painted a soothing pale blue, the lights dimmed to create a restful calm, and a fetal heart monitor was sending out steady beeps like the heartbeat of hope. Dr. Evelyn Shaw, a woman 45 years old with brown hair neatly tied back and warm eyes that radiated professionalism and devotion, had carried out a thorough examination of Elena for more than 2 hours, from ultrasound to blood tests, from checking blood pressure to monitoring the baby's heartbeat. When she set the ultrasound probe down and turned to Elena with a relieved smile, Elena felt her own heart stop for an instant as she waited for the verdict. "The baby is completely healthy," Dr. Shaw announced in a warm, reassuring tone. "The heartbeat is normal, and there are no signs of any problem after the impact. You are very lucky, Elena, and your instinct to protect your child saved the baby. However, I need you to rest absolutely for at least 2 weeks. Avoid all stress and any strenuous activity. We do not want any risk at all." Those words were like cool water poured over Elena's scorched spirit, and she could not hold back any more, tears spilling like a spring. But these were tears of relief, of boundless happiness at knowing the small life inside her was still safe. She wrapped both arms around her belly and whispered words of love to the tiny being within, and in that moment, every pain, every humiliation, everything she had endured today no longer mattered. Outside in the hospital corridor, Dominic Valenti stood leaning against the white wall, gray eyes looking through a small window into the room where Elena was being cared for. He had been there since Elena arrived, yet he did not go in, only watched and waited in silence. Marcus Chen stood a few steps away, patient as always, And when Dr. Shaw left the room after finishing the exam, he approached Dominic. "She asked about you," Marcus said quietly. "She wants to meet the man who helped her at the hotel to thank him. I do not think she knows who you are." Dominic was silent for a moment, his eyes still fixed on the hospital room, as if wrestling with something inside himself. He was not used to letting anyone see the real man beneath the cold armor he had spent years building, not used to showing care or softness to anyone except Marcus. But then he drew a deep breath, gave a slight nod, and walked into the room. Elena lay on the bed with eyes red from crying, yet lit with a peace she had not felt in months, and when she saw the man in the black suit step in, she tried to sit up out of respect. "Please stay resting," Dominic said, his voice still gentle the way it had been when he spoke to her in the hotel lobby. He pulled a chair to the bedside and sat down, keeping enough distance that she would not feel her privacy invaded. "Thank you," Elena said, her voice still a little unsteady after everything she had been through. "I do not know what to say. You helped me when no one else did. But why? You do not know me. Why do you care about a stranger like me?" Dominic did not answer right away. He looked down at his hands resting on his thighs, and for a brief moment Elena saw the cold mask on his face crack slightly, revealing a deep pain he had kept hidden underneath. "There was someone I did not save once," Dominic finally said, his voice low and distant, as if speaking to himself more than to Elena. "You remind me of her. The way you stood alone in a crowd. The way you were surrounded and no one stepped forward to protect you. The way you tried to stay calm even while you were being hurt." Elena did not ask more. She did not need to. She saw the pain in the gray eyes of this powerful man, saw the wound still bleeding after so many years, and she understood that whoever he was, whatever he did out there, inside him there was still a heart that could love and could suffer like anyone else. Dominic rose, as if he had said more than he meant to, and he moved toward the door, then stopped and looked back at Elena one last time. "I will make sure the person who harmed you is held accountable," he said with quiet determination. "That is a promise. Rest and take care of yourself and the baby. Everything else, leave it to me." And when the hospital room door closed behind Dominic, Elena lay there in silence, one hand on her belly, and for the first time in many years, she felt that someone was truly on her side. In the days that followed, the media storm not only failed to fade, it flared more violently than ever, like a fire being fed fresh fuel with every passing hour. The video of what happened at the Meridian Grand kept spreading at a dizzying speed, climbing from millions of views to tens of millions, and the hashtag Justice for Elena quickly became a trending term not only in New York but across the entire country. People shared the video with furious commentary, long posts analyzing Victoria's violent behavior, and calls for justice for an innocent pregnant woman. Journalists and investigative reporters began digging into the attacker's identity, and when they discovered that Victoria Harrington was the only daughter of Judge Robert Harrington, one of the city's most respected judges, the story suddenly became twice as explosive. "A judge's daughter attacks a pregnant woman inside a five-star hotel," headlines screamed across every front page. "Will the daughter of a guardian of justice receive special privilege before the law?" The Harrington family stays silent amid a shocking scandal. The public raged, demanding Victoria be held accountable like any ordinary citizen, and that outrage swelled even higher when people learned Victoria had caused trouble many times in the past, yet everything had been mysteriously smoothed over. While public opinion boiled over Victoria, Dominic Valenti quietly opened another front that no one knew about. He ordered Marcus to investigate Ryan Mitchell, the cowardly man who had stood and watched his wife be humiliated and attacked without intervening. With Dominic's wide information network and the financial world connections he had built over many years, it did not take long to uncover Ryan's darkest secrets. Within only 3 days, Marcus had gathered full proof that Ryan Mitchell had used company funds to buy expensive gifts for Victoria, from designer handbags to diamond jewelry, from luxury trips to dinners at 5-star restaurants. More than that, they discovered that Ryan and Victoria had carried on their affair inside the company office itself, using a private conference room for secret meetings, a severe violation of corporate ethics rules that Ryan, as chief financial officer, should have been the first to uphold. All of this information, along with undeniable evidence including emails, messages, payment receipts, and images from the company security cameras, was sent anonymously to the board of directors at the corporation where Ryan worked. The response came almost immediately when Ryan Mitchell was summoned to an emergency board meeting the next morning, and his face as he walked into the conference room went pale, as if he had just seen his own ghost. At the same time, Victoria Harrington received a second summons to the police station, but this time it was no longer to give a statement. The prosecutor handling the case, After reviewing all evidence, including video from multiple angles, testimony from dozens of witnesses, and medical reports on Elena's condition, decided to formally charge Victoria Harrington with intentional assault and endangering a pregnant woman, charges that could bring prison time if she were convicted. Victoria walked into the station with a hollowed face and dazed eyes, completely unlike the poised, confident image she had carried only days earlier. The wall of protection she had believed was unbreakable, built from her family's money and power over 29 years, was now crumbling piece by piece right in front of her. Her father refused to help, the public demanded punishment, and the legal system she had once thought would never touch her was now tightening its grip with every passing minute. News that Judge Robert Harrington would hold a press conference that afternoon swept through the city like an autumn wind racing down Manhattan streets, and all of New York seemed to hold its breath, waiting to hear what the man called the conscience of the justice system would say about the scandal involving his daughter. Major television networks sent reporters to the courthouse, online news sites refreshed minute by minute, and on social media millions watched the live stream, offering conflicting predictions about the judge's decision. Some believed that no matter how incorruptible he was said to be, no father could watch his daughter face prosecution without stepping in. Others argued that if Harrington truly was the man he had always presented himself to be, he would let the law handle the case fairly. But no one knew what would happen when the boundary between fatherhood and justice became that fragile. At exactly 3 p.m, Robert Harrington stepped up to the podium in a press room, packed tight with reporters and cameras, and as he stood there under the blinding flash of lights, anyone could see the change on the judge's face. His deep blue eyes carried a grief he could not hide. The lines on his forehead seemed deeper than they had been only days before, and his white silver hair looked more disheveled than usual, as if he had not slept for nights. He placed both hands on the podium, drew a long breath to steady himself, and when he began to speak, his voice trembled slightly, yet still held the steady authority of a man who had stood before thousands of courtrooms over the long span of his career. For 35 years of service in the justice system, Harrington began, I have believed that justice makes no exceptions. No exceptions for the rich or the poor, the powerful or the weak, the familiar or the unknown. The law must be applied fairly to everyone, and that is the principle I have followed in every ruling, every case, every day of my work. He paused for a moment, eyes dropping to the podium as if searching for strength to say what came next. Today, that belief is being tested in a way I never imagined. My daughter, Victoria Harrington, is facing criminal allegations for assaulting a pregnant woman. I have watched the video. I have seen what my child did, and as a father my heart is broken. His voice caught for a brief second, but he steadied himself quickly and continued, resolve clear in every word. But as a judge, a man who has served justice all his life, my answer remains the same, and it will never change. Justice makes no exceptions, even for my daughter. I will not interfere with the investigation and prosecution. I will not use any relationship or influence to alter the course of this case. I will let the law do its work, as it has done for every other citizen of this country. If my daughter is guilty, she will be held accountable like anyone else. That is the right thing to do, no matter how painful it is. In the Harrington family's luxurious apartment, Victoria sat before the television screen with a face as pale as a corpse, eyes wide with horror as she heard her father's words pour from the speakers. She had hoped, prayed, believed that at the last moment he would change his mind, would find a way to save her the way he always had for 29 years. But now, hearing him publicly declare before the whole world that he would not protect her, Victoria felt as if the ground beneath her had collapsed, and she was falling freely into a bottomless abyss. For the first time in her life, she understood a brutal truth she had always refused to accept, that money can't buy everything, that power can't shield every mistake, that there are consequences no one, not even her father, can help her escape. She sat there, her body shaking out of control, tears streaming down her cheeks, and she knew the world she had lived in for 29 years had completely fallen apart. Back in the press room, Robert Harrington ended his statement in a low, exhausted voice. I have nothing more to say. Thank you all. He stepped down from the podium beneath a rain of shouted questions from reporters demanding more answers, but he did not speak another word. His eyes were red as if he were holding back tears, yet his steps remained steady without the smallest hesitation as he left the room. This was the price of integrity, and Robert Harrington chose to pay it even if it meant losing the love of the only daughter he cherished more than his own life. 2 months after Judge Harrington's shocking press conference, the trial of Victoria Harrington officially began at the Manhattan County Courthouse under the attention of the entire nation. with hundreds of reporters packed outside the building and millions watching through live television coverage. The courtroom was filled to capacity, from journalists to ordinary people who wanted to witness justice with their own eyes. And when Victoria entered in a modest light gray suit so different from her usual glamorous style, everyone could see the significant change on the face of the Harrington heiress. The green eyes that once looked down on the world now stayed lowered, avoiding every gaze, her cheeks hollowed by sleeplessness and worry, her walk no longer carrying confident power but the guarded shrinking of someone who knows she is facing consequences she can't escape. The prosecutor presented the evidence in a methodical, undeniable sequence, beginning with the hotel security footage from the Meridian Grand that clearly captured every moment. Victoria shoved Elena into the mirrored wall, followed by the phone videos taken by guests that recorded the entire public humiliation leading up to it, and finally the detailed medical report describing Elena's condition immediately afterward, along with the risks the unborn baby had been forced to face. 12 witnesses took the stand, one after another, each confirming what they had seen with their own eyes, each statement like another nail hammered into the coffin of Victoria's hope for acquittal. The defense attorney, one of the best money could buy, tried with all his skill to find gaps in the evidence, tried to argue that Victoria acted while emotionally out of control and had no intent to cause serious harm, but against video proof that was clear down to the smallest detail, every attempt at defense became meaningless and even backfired as the public grew angrier at what felt like excuse-making. The most tense moment of the trial arrived when Elena Carter was called to the witness stand. She walked slowly, her pregnant belly now much larger than it had been 2 months earlier, one hand resting protectively over it out of a habit that had become second nature. And as she sat in the witness chair, her brown eyes swept across the courtroom and paused for a brief moment on the last row, where Dominic Valenti sat in shadow, gray eyes watching her in silence. His quiet presence felt like an invisible strength pouring courage into her. And when Elena began to tell what had happened that fateful afternoon, her voice trembled but stayed clear and coherent, every word spoken with the sincerity and astonishing steadiness of someone who had moved through fear to reclaim justice for herself. After 3 days of tense proceedings, the judge presiding over the case finally delivered the verdict amid the breathless waiting of the entire courtroom. Victoria Harrington was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory participation in a psychological therapy program for anger management over the course of 1 year, and a restraining order forbidding her from approaching Elena Carter and her child for 5 years. When the sentence was read, Victoria stood there with a face as white as paper, her legs trembling as if they might give out. And even though the punishment did not include actual prison time, it still struck her like a crushing blow, a public confirmation before the whole world that she was guilty and would be held responsible for what she had done. Meanwhile, Ryan Mitchell's fate was no better. After the emergency meeting with the board of directors, he was fired immediately from his position as chief financial officer for severe violations of corporate ethics rules, and news of his scandal spread through New York's financial circles, causing the reputation he had spent years building to collapse completely in only a few days. No company wanted to hire someone with a record like that, and Ryan Mitchell went from a powerful chief financial officer to an unemployed man abandoned by society. Elena, with the legal support Dominic quietly arranged, completed the divorce quickly and smoothly, cutting every remaining tie to the man who had betrayed her. When she stepped out of the courthouse after the final hearing, warm autumn sunlight fell across her face, and for the first time in months, she felt real relief spread through her chest. Justice had been done, and she could finally begin a new chapter of her life. Time passed quickly after the trial of Victoria Harrington, and Elena Carter's life had changed in ways she never could have imagined. On the fateful day, she walked into the Meridian Grand's lobby with the envelope of separation papers in her hand. She was now living in a cozy 2-bedroom apartment in a high-security building on the Upper East Side. An apartment Dominic arranged for her right after the trial ended, not so they could live together, but simply to make sure she had a safe and comfortable place to prepare to welcome the child soon to be born. At first, Elena refused, uneasy about accepting something so large from a man she still did not fully understand. But Dominic persuaded her with a gentle voice and an honest look that this was not charity or a chain, it was simply that he wanted her to be safe, and in the end she agreed on the condition that one day she would stand on her own feet and repay everything. Elena's pregnancy went smoothly under the attentive care of Dr. Evelyn Shaw, who came to see her regularly every 2 weeks and always reassured her that the baby was growing strong and perfect. Her belly was now round and full, and each time she felt the soft kicks from inside, Elena would smile in happiness with boundless gratitude that her child had made it safely through that terrifying moment. The relationship between Elena and Dominic grew slowly and naturally, like a small stream winding over stones, never rushed, never forced, simply two people gradually learning how to trust each other. Dominic always kept a respectful distance, never appearing without notice, never doing anything that made Elena feel intruded upon or uncomfortable. He visited a few times each week, sometimes only to ask about her health and the baby, sometimes bringing food he knew she liked, and occasionally, on rare evenings when neither of them was busy, they sat together for dinner in the small apartment, talking about the simplest things in life. Through those brief conversations, Elena slowly came to understand that Dominic Valenti was not the monster the outside world painted him to be, not the cold and ruthless mafia boss people whispered about. Behind that hard shell was a man with a heart that could love and could suffer, carrying a deep wound that had never healed. One spring evening, when cherry blossoms were beginning to bloom on New York streets, Dominic sat by the window of Elena's apartment, gray eyes looking out over the city glittering with lights below, and for the first time he told her about Sophia. He spoke of his little sister with gray eyes just like his, and a smile that could warm even the coldest winter days, of the way she looked at him like a hero and waited for him to come home after every long trip, of the fateful night when she was bullied beyond what she could endure while he was half a world away and could do nothing to save her. Dominic's voice grew low and broken as he spoke of the last message Sophia sent him, of the guilt that had haunted him for 7 years, of the vow he had made to himself that he would never let anyone else suffer something like that alone again. "She would like you," Dominic said, his gray eyes still fixed on the distance, yet his voice warmer when he spoke of Elena. "You are strong in the way she should have been allowed to be. You stood steady against everything they threw at you. You did not collapse. You fought for your child. Sophia would admire that." Elena sat in silence and listened, her heart tightening at the pain the man before her had carried for so many years. Now she understood why he had helped her that day, understood why he was willing to do whatever it took to make sure justice was done, understood that inside him there was still the boy who had loved his sister more than anything in the world. Without hesitation, Elena reached out and gently placed her hand over Dominic's clenched hand on his thigh, and the warmth of her small palm spread through his skin like a warm stream running through ice. "She would be proud of you," Elena said, her voice steady and gentle, "for what you did, for who you became. You could not save her, but you saved me. You gave me hope when I had no one left to lean on, and I believe that wherever she is looking down and smiling because of her brother." Dominic turned to look at Elena, and in those gray eyes that were usually cold, she saw something perhaps no one else had ever witnessed. A single tear sliding down his cheek before he could stop it. He did not speak, he only turned his hand over to hold hers lightly, and in that quiet moment, with the city lights shimmering beyond the window and the warmth of the woman beside him, Dominic Valenti felt, for the first time in 7 years, the wound in his heart beginning to heal. The call came at 3 a.m. on a late April night, while Dominic sat in his private office reviewing business reports, and the instant he saw Elena's name glowing on his phone screen at that hour, his heart tightened with a powerful premonition. Elena's voice on the other end trembled but tried to stay steady as she said her water had broken and the contractions were coming faster and closer together. Dominic did not say much, only told her to stay calm and not move, that he would be there immediately, and in less than 15 minutes his car was parked in front of Elena's apartment building with Marcus at the wheel and Dr. Shaw already notified to be ready at Mount Sinai. The trip to the hospital unfolded in a haze of tension and fear, Elena lying in the back seat with Dominic beside her, gripping her hand each time a contraction crashed over her, and he whispered reassurance into her ear, even as his own heart hammered so hard it felt like it might choke him. When they reached the hospital, Dr. Shaw was waiting with the medical team, and Elena was rushed straight into the delivery room while Dominic was told to wait outside. The hours that followed moved like a long nightmare for Dominic as he paced the quiet corridor, gray eyes fixed again and again on the closed delivery room door, every small sound from inside making him flinch. Marcus stood silently in the corner, watching his boss with surprise, because in more than a decade beside Dominic he had never seen that cold man show such open worry for anyone. Then at last, after nearly 6 hours of tense waiting, the cry of a newborn rose through the delivery room door, clear and strong like a bell announcing a new life just arrived, and Dominic felt his legs suddenly go weak with relief. Dr. Shaw stepped out not long after with a radiant smile on her exhausted face, telling them everything had gone smoothly, and both mother and baby were healthy. A baby boy weighing 3 kilograms, 200 grams with lungs astonishingly strong, judging by the powerful cry. Elena lay in the hospital bed, her face pale with exhaustion, yet glowing with overwhelming happiness, as the nurse placed her tiny son into her arms. She looked down at the small face with eyes still closed. The miniature fingers curled into little fists, and tears of joy streamed down her cheeks as she whispered the name she had chosen long ago. "Julian," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your name is Julian." The nurse beside her smiled warmly at the moving sight and spoke to Elena with clear admiration. "You protected this baby before he was even born," she said. "He is so lucky to have a mother as strong and loving as you." Outside the room, Dominic stood behind the glass, gray eyes watching Elena cradle Julian in her arms, and something strange swelled in his chest, a warmth he thought he had forgotten how to feel a long time ago. Marcus stood beside him, watched Dominic for a moment, then spoke. "Aren't you going in?" Dominic shook his head slightly, his eyes still locked on the mother and child inside. "This is her moment," he said in a low voice. "I do not want to intrude," but as if she sensed him, Elena lifted her head and looked toward the glass, her brown eyes meeting his gray ones, and a gentle smile bloomed on her lips before she raised her hand in a small wave, motioning him into the room. Dominic hesitated for a heartbeat, then pushed the door open and stepped inside, the footsteps of the most powerful kingpin in New York suddenly soft and careful, as if he were walking on water. He came to the bedside and looked down at the newborn resting in his mother's arms, and his breath caught at the pure, fragile beauty of that little life. "Do you want to hold him?" Elena asked softly. Dominic faltered, hands that had held power and spread fear suddenly clumsy and uncertain, as if he were afraid he would hurt the baby if he touched him. But then Elena gently placed Julian into his arms, and as Dominic received the child with utmost care, as he looked down at the tiny face sleeping peacefully against him, the cold gray in his eyes melted like ice under spring sun. Julian opened his eyes for a brief moment, as if he wanted to see who was holding him, and Dominic felt his heart dissolve completely in those clear eyes, the eyes of a life newly arrived in this world, with all the purity and innocence the world had taken from him far too long ago. 1 year after the shocking incident at the Meridian Grand Hotel, Elena Carter stood before a packed auditorium at a women's rights protection conference held at the Manhattan Convention Center, with Julian, 6 months old, resting peacefully in her arms, his clear eyes curious as he studied the world around him. The stage lights fell across Elena's face, and she realized how much she had changed since that fateful day. No longer the fragile, lonely woman who walked into the hotel lobby with a broken heart, but now a strong mother, a survivor, and a voice for those still living through what she once endured. 1 year ago, Elena began her speech, her voice trembling faintly yet steady. "I stood in the lobby of a luxury hotel thinking I was completely alone. I was humiliated. I was attacked. And I believed no one cared. No one would help. No one would stand on my side. But I was wrong. Someone did not look away when they saw me fall. There were witnesses brave enough to speak the truth. There was evidence that could not be hidden or twisted, and justice was served, with no exceptions for anyone, no matter how powerful or wealthy they might be." She paused, looked down at Julian, smiling up at her, then lifted her head to the audience, eyes shining with hope. "And today, I stand here with my son, the baby I protected before he was born, to tell all of you one single thing: never give up, never think you are alone, and never stop believing in justice." Applause thundered through the hall, and in the sea of people rising to cheer, in the last row in the darkest corner of the room, Dominic Valenti sat quietly watching, gray eyes lit with pride and something warmer he still did not dare to name. After the event, while Elena was busy with people who wanted to shake her hand and share their own stories, Dominic slipped away and drove to Woodlawn Cemetery on the outskirts of the city, where Sophia had been resting for 7 years. He knelt before the simple grave covered with fresh flowers he had someone bring every week, and he placed one more pure white flower on the mound. "Sophia," Dominic whispered, his voice low and thick with emotion, "I could not save you. That is something I will regret for the rest of my life. But I saved her. I kept my promise to myself, that I would never let anyone be alone the way you were alone. I hope you are smiling somewhere, my little sister." A light wind passed through, stirring the white petals like an invisible embrace from a sister who was gone, and Dominic felt peace spread through his chest, the peace he had been searching for across 7 long years. He stood, turned, and walked toward the golden afternoon sunlight flooding the path between the rows of graves, and his phone in his pocket vibrated with a new message. "Julian and I are waiting for you. Come home." Dominic looked at Elena's words, and for the first time in many long years a real smile spread across his mouth, Not the cold or mocking smile the world was used to seeing, but the smile of a man who had finally found light after a long road through darkness. He walked on, and this time the darkness did not follow behind him anymore. This story brings us profound lessons about life. That justice may arrive late, but it will never be absent. That arrogance and cruelty will ultimately pay a price. That kindness and the courage to stand up and protect the weak are the noblest qualities of human beings. And that healing is a journey, not a destination, but every step brings us closer to the light. Thank you for listening to this story. How do you feel about it? Does it remind you of anything in real life? Please share what you feel from the depths of your heart in the comments below. We truly want to hear it. If you found this story meaningful, please subscribe to the channel, tap like, and share so that together we can spread human stories every day. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace in every day. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.